Thank you.
Okay. Hello. Today, I want to introduce you to someone. Uh, Gebre Selassie is a someone I've known for a number of years. He has a very interesting background, and I've asked him to participate in this course to be a kind of co-instructor for the remainder of the semester. This week's topic on the International Monetary Fund is of particular interest and relevance to Gebre Selassie because he was intimately involved in the work of the IMF. And previous to the IMF, he was the finance minister in the East African country of Eritrea. And so he's been on both sides of the table with regard to the IMF. And if we're going to take a comprehensive look of at how the IMF operates as a development organization, then his perspective is very important. So, Gebre Selassie, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Michael, and thanks for the very kind introduction. And
Yeah.
hi to everybody.
So you are based in Washington D.C. right now. Is that correct?
Right?
Okay. Well, that's probably as much closer to the IMF than anybody else here.
Yeah.
So this week in our discussion, we're trying to understand very succinctly, what the IMF does and how it operates as a development organization. Can you perhaps give us a very quick sort of appreciation of what the IMF does, based on your experience of working with it and being a recipient. What is the role of the IMF in the in the context of development?
Uh, Thank you, Michael. I think the most important thing in this context is to understand the origins of the IMF itself. It was a reaction to the Great Depression and the way that economic crisis was exacerbated by the activities and policies that each country at that moment was taking place, in terms of competitive foreign exchange depreciation, trade protectionist trade policies. So as a result, this construct, this IMF, was developed to basically deal with the main issue of the post-war economic development, and that was maintenance of a stable economic global economic framework, particularly with respect to monetary and financial policies and exchange rate policies. Its main mandate is directed towards that. There is a misconception, basically, in a lot of people's minds that the IMF is a development institution. The IMF is not really a development institution. Its main core mandate is maintaining economic stability, particularly in the financial and monetary arena, and at the core with exchange rates. And it does maintain surveillance towards this end. It's not
Okay.
really a development institution. And I have heard that debated in the board itself, where people have said, no, this is not really a development institution.
Okay, but the IMF is implicated in the development discussion because a lot of times, particularly with the World Bank which is a development organization, will not institute a program in a particular country unless the IMF the discipline that the IMF imposes, is taken care of. So, how do you see sort of? I mean, what is the main impact of the IMF with regard to development, even if we understand that it's not a development organization per se. It has an impact on development. Yeah.
Right, yeah. And here lies the contradiction. The IMF is not the core development institution, but it is at the core, it is the main institution, global institution that really directs and guides the development policies of the developing countries.
Mm.
That's a contradictory in a very paradoxical situation. You have an institution that is not really, has the mindset of development, guiding and vetting and dictating the economic policies of these developing countries. That's really the tragedy, the untenable position, because the IMF, because it has to surveil, because of its surveillance function, it has to sort of vet the policies of all developing countries. But its framework, its perspective is from the position of stability, maintaining stability. Whereas growth is, it's a dynamic process. It is contradictory to stability. It's
Mhm.
disequilibrium, and it's really a different kind of ball game. So here is the main contradiction.
Now,
If
yeah,
I have made myself clear.
yeah, sure. Now, one of the main criticisms of the IMF is that they impose a discipline upon governments that end up hurting people. All right. So, one of the first things that happens is, the IMF says you've got to bring discipline to your national budget. And,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
a lot of countries interpret that as, getting rid of social services, getting rid of support for education and healthcare. I mean, do you think that the criticism of the IMS is justified, or that that in fact this kind of discipline is necessary in order for countries to move forward?
I think the problem here is the policies that are dictated or that the IMF wants are are in harmony with the short-term balances that are required to maintain a stable economy, but they are not the necessary conditions or the optimal policies that will generate the growth. And in this respect, when the mandate of the IMF is maintaining financial balance, the budgetary balance, the foreign exchange balance, the equilibrium in trade, and etc. This is contrary to what is required in order to generate growth. And when the IMF deals with this kind, of course, they come up from the perspective of maintaining a short-term balance in your budget. And to do that, the first thing to be sacrificed is probably social and sort of safety nets and investments in education and etc. But I think we have to look at this from a broader perspective. What's wrong with the IMF in a sense, vis-a-vis the developing world, the developing countries? And there are three issues in there. The first is, first of all, the divergent interests between those of the developing countries and those of the main core countries, who really dominate and dictate whatever goes in the IMF. These are mature economies whose main concern is stability, issues of where minimizing the economic disruptions. On the other hand, you have got this vast majority of countries and peoples whose main interest is generating economic growth. This is the divergence in this perspective. So that is the main problem. One. The second issue is, of course, the perspective of the IMF. The IMF is, there first of all for global, permanent surveillance function, but at the same time, the IMF intervenes when there is disruption in instability, and these are basically short-term disruptions, as conceived originally. And these short-term disruptions require short-term adjustment programs, whereas the issue for the developing countries is long-term structural adjustment in a sense which takes a long-term process. And so the adjustment for the for the IMF is balancing your books within the short term, but you can't do that when dealing long-term problems of generating growth, expanding employment, etc. And the
Yeah.
third is of governance issues. We'll come to that. But these are sort of the framework we should have when dealing, critiquing the IMF, and
So
this boils down from its mandate, basically.
so would you say the main sort of opportunity for the IMF to become a more effective development organization is to adopt a much longer time frame in terms of its programs. That the short term, sort of the pressure to come up with short term results is really not in the best interests, particularly of the countries that are in most in need of structural adjustment. So,
Exactly.
mm,
It's not optimal because what you have to sort of you're telling with talking about transforming your economy uh, vis-a-vis sort of dealing with short-term disequilibrium, short-term disruptions, imbalance that might occur. You're talking about, the really long-term, sort of underdevelopment where the profile of your economy is basically, low productivity in all sectors and basically rural and agricultural in most instances or natural resource based, whereas the manufacturing modern sector is very, is minimal. And you're talking about, transforming that to what is really, a modern economy. And uh, that perspective requires a long-term horizon in terms of
mm.
time. You can address that. This is centuries long, sort of problem, and you can't deal within the perspective of 3, 5 years in short-term programs.
Okay, all right. Well, I think that's all we have time for right now. But what I'd like to do is uh, invite you onto the discussion board this week to continue this discussion, and we'll get inputs from our student colleagues as well. So thank you, Gebre. We're going to be doing this quite often, so I will I'll be in touch soon. Okay.
Great.
All
Happy
right.
to join you and learn from your discussion.
Okay. Well, I
Okay.
think I think with you on board, we're going to have a much richer discussion. So see you later.
See ya.